all back, honey. I was like, let me just pull it back.
Yes, you giving us like a little slick back today. No hair to do. I gave you all the edges and new growth with my little ponytail.
We still got. I think Rodrika is going to come on the show soon and talk about the edges and the Crown Act because you always talk about these edges all the time, every show.
Because I'm so proud. Because listen, for anyone out there, if you know me, that you know that I would always switch up my hairstyles. But I've been completely natural for, I don't know, 15 years. And what that means for folks who are not familiar, no chemicals, no relaxers aside from obviously hair color, right? And so I would wear it either like a fro or a fade or curly or whatever the case may be. This is new for me, like having some distance between my
Well,
scalp and
well, you did have that raspberry hair that one time.
listen, it's always you that wants to bring up the past. But I did have that hair, but this has been my favorite hair, like my favorite braids in the
Okay.
life. So
No,
anyway,
they're very cute and versatile. You've been rocking all kinds of funky, fun looks. So I really am loving them too.
thank you. And I just feel so young with them. Because I'd be forgetting how old I am. But happy Monday, y'all. I hope y'all are ready for another lively conversation, your daily dose of D and B with D and B, right? Daily
Yep.
Dose of Debo with DV, absolutely. But this is Blaire Hervey. For anyone who is not familiar, my name is Blaire G. Hervey. I am the founder and CEO of The Corporate Strategist. I am joined by my colorful co-host, my bestie and soul friend of over 20 plus years, DeAngelo Crane today. Hi, D.
Hi, Blair Hervey, soul friend of 20 plus years. I always say we met when we were 3 years old. Thank you, because you're not dating us. All right. It's funny when I talk to young people and I'll be like, "Do you remember this reference?" And they don't remember. That's when I realize how old I am. When I talk to my nieces and nephews, I'm like, "Do y'all know this song?" And they be like,
Mhm.
"No." And then I realize we were not three when we met. We were older than three.
Absolutely. It's not about how old you are. It's about how wise you've gotten, how much more mature. I have pictures of us and our style has definitely evolved a million times over. So thank goodness we're aging because there is, an alternative to aging, ain't it?
And aging gracefully and wonderfully. I must say that. And yes, I appreciate the wisdom I've learned all these years, but I wish I didn't have to learn it. Some of them the hard way. But that's a whole other show. Okay, that's a whole other show.
Talk about aging. Well, welcome everyone out there to the Black DEIBA Collective Live. We are so happy to have you. Today, we don't have any guest hosts. It's just your co-host going back and forth about a lovely conversation. I cannot wait to get into it. But before we do, Dee, tell us a little bit more about my favorite segment.
It is the art of the check-in here on the Black Diva Collective Live. We always want to just take a moment to really reflect and see how people are doing, especially when we have guests on the show. And the reason why we do this is because we're asking leaders to do this each and every day with their employees. No longer are just the "how you doing" messages. We really are asking you to go deeper, and so we're going to model that here on the Black Diva Collective. So, Blaire, how are you feeling? How's your heart? How's your soul? How's your mind today?
Oh, I'm feeling great. And I just noticed that eating breakfast, like the trainer that I had in Louisville, Kentucky, he mentioned to eat breakfast every time before I work out. And I was like, I don't eat breakfast. I might grab a shake or something. But today I had banana oatmeal with some chia seeds and some peanut butter and some protein. And I think it's got my energy way up. So I'm feeling absolutely fantastic. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good, but my energy's probably here because I've ate too much bread today. Because I started my day with breakfast too, but I had a biscuit with sausage gravy on it that I made yesterday for breakfast.
This is
Mm.
from the man who says he always wants to shed a little tummy pounds.
Well, what happened is, I have lost 10 pounds, so now I just feel like I can eat everything in the world, but I need to
Well, I'm gonna
watch.
see you in person when I see you very soon. I didn't know that you've lost 10 pounds, but I'm so happy for you. But make sure you are taking care of your mind as well as your body by watching what we eat. Amen. So we are going to get into this fabulous, fabulous conversation today. I definitely brought it to the TBDC table. You keep shaking your head because you're like, ooh, I work in this field, but we're talking about HR today. And we're probably going to debate a little bit, just a healthy conversation, a healthy little go back and forth, but to determine whether or not HR is really for the people. But Dee, can you give us a little bit more about this particular topic?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's so many places that we can go to about the topic. And I love that you always drop stats about the topic, right? So, we're really talking about is HR for the people. When we say people, we're talking about Black folks. And Blaire, to your point, a recent SHRM survey said that 49% of Black professionals think race or ethnicity based discrimination exists in the workplace. And those were HR professionals. And of those professionals that they also questioned, only 13% of white professionals, HR professionals, agree with that statement, right? So we know there's some disparities between how people feel who are actually working in HR around how companies are helping Black professionals within the organization, right? And so I think to your point of this conversation, we've seen that HR has traditionally been very transactional. And I think in those transactional phases of building HR departments, discrimination was baked into the systems that we have, right? And so companies are just starting now to have conversations around what is the impact of these systems we've used for so many years that have not made this place equitable, and how do we change that? And so I think this is a very timely conversation to think about, is HR for us or not for us? And I'll be very honest with you. As I told you, I was like, you want I can't talk about this because I am currently a person who works in HR also and has worked in HR for the last 17 years, as well as I have positive experiences with HR, right? HR proper, or HR just doing the more transactional work. However, I think this is a great conversation for us to dig into. And let me just say this about to our audience: we are not professionals. We're not the experts. We may have worked in this field and maybe know something about it, but we're continuing just to bring conversations to you that will jog some debate, some energy, and for people who may say this is stuff that we're working on right now, to come on the show and have more conversation with us about the particular subject. So let's dive into it. Why did you even want to talk about this subject? Is HR for the people? What does that mean to you? Where did that come from for you?
Well, you know what? Let's go back. We are professionals. Let's go ahead and say that. But experts in this particular topic, I understand where you're coming from. It's from our lived experience. And so two things came to mind. I think this weekend, being glued to the couch for 2 whole days, getting sleep, getting rest, taking a shower finally this morning. You know what? I had a lot on my mind. I had an opportunity to go through some of our messaging and some of our ideas. And we had some topics that were listed there. And that was at the top of the list. And I was like, let's go for it. Because I could think about times when I felt like HR was my friend, and they are or were a group, or someone in that group was someone I could go to with a challenging situation, a debacle, some discrimination, in an effort to either get some mentorship or to resolve the issue, or to figure out just, how to overcome it. And what I learned was, yes, we were having a conversation, but it was a data collecting conversation. And in turn, that data was shared with the people who were involved in whatever that debacle or that challenge may have been. And so I can think of several situations when that has occurred, until I started realizing, okay, that HR works for the company, not necessarily and exclusively for the employees. So that was one of the reasons why it came to mind, and it felt very, very fresh. I also thought about what we could do differently as Black DEI practitioners, as folks who do work in DEI, to partner better with HR. Because I noticed a couple of things are happening, especially in the light of, the killing of George Floyd in 2020. There were a lot of HR professionals who assumed these DEI roles, but they didn't necessarily have the skill set to work in DEI. So they're carrying some of these things that you've already talked about, whether it's the standard, some of the policies, some of the procedures, some of the way things have always been done, and they're bringing it into DEI. And or they don't necessarily have the heart, the passion, or the skill set for it. Or maybe they do, but again, they're still not helping the people that need the help the most. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, how can DEI practitioners bridge that gap and help be better liaisons between the people and HR? So those were a few thoughts that came to mind. What thoughts came to mind for you?
Well, I think first thing is, let me just say, give you a different point of view, as perspective, is that HR is really working for the good of both parties. When we're thinking about outcomes, and I'm talking about transactional, traditional, when we think about employee relations, that's what their outcomes are. However, what you're seeing is that over the course of the last 20 to 30 years is that companies are really starting to less think about those. They're starting to starting to think about how do we mitigate problems up front. So when you think about companies who are putting in place mentoring programs, when they're hiring talent management professionals, when they're hiring people to really think about what is the experience of employees at the business, when you think about diversity and inclusion people, they're all thinking about this the culture of the organization and the people within the organization. And how do we make them become advocates and feel better about working here? Then hopefully those employee complaints and those employee relations things that we have traditionally dealt with are going to be less, because we're thinking about them having a better experience. And I would also submit to you, it's not about the DEI professionals being liaisons. It's about the company adopting some of the DEI principles that the DEI professionals are telling you to do, because DEI should exist in every single space within the organization, right? And so if we are looking at it, if we're looking at everything we do from a equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, then we're cutting down on some of that employee relations things. We're thinking about what are the nuanced conversations that we're not having about how someone is showing up at work, right? And maybe we're understanding a deeper meaning of those things. So it's one of those things of, if someone is late every day, what do we know? Now we're understanding that maybe reasons why someone may be late because they need childcare. And so now people are putting childcare on site. So we're thinking about how we mitigate some of those things. And so it's really about, because see, the thing is, I think that people think, so there's lots of conversations. Should DEI exist within HR? Should it not exist within HR? Are we HR professionals? Well, what's happening is people are coming to us as we are HR professionals and sharing their stories and their anger and all of these frustrations with us. So we do have to put on our HR hat, but we also, like you said, there's some liaisonness, but there's also some telling the organizations they need to really think about, once again, their systems and the people who are in the systems, because they never had to think about this before. Thinking about the people, we thought about the process. We now are saying you need to think about the people before the process.
So, okay, I totally understand that. When we're thinking about, like, the way that I'm thinking about it, bridging the gap, and DEI practitioners, like you said, they're taking on some of those HR responsibilities, like hearing those stories. If I go to my ERG leader, my affinity group leader, if I go to my, quote unquote DEI department or whatever the case may be, I feel like that's a safer space. That's the space where I can go to that's actually for me, where I can share my lived experience, I can get some feedback, and I don't have to worry about some type of complaint being made. So I'm wondering, if there is no separation, if there is no DEI department in HR, or if DEI reports to HR, then where is the safe space?
I think that's a good question you bring there. I think we can still exist in HR and still have safe spaces with us, but also realize there are times when we must, even if we don't sit in HR, where we must report what we're hearing, because it is not, sometimes some things that they're sharing are things that are discrimination that needs to be shared and needs to be mitigated, that goes above and beyond the work we're doing within organizations, right? When we think about leaders who are not leading effectively, right, and who are causing some tension for their employees, or are causing them to feel like they're discriminating against an employee, we do need to mitigate that. We do need to get that employee out of that leader, out of that situation, or out of the organization. And we can't do that as diversity people, right? We need to take it to HR proper, so to speak, or those people who work in that space. So it's one of those things. I think you're right. I think we do need safe spaces, but what we should be creating, hopefully, is that all of HR should be a safe space. So when we think about going to HR business partners, which we're seeing those roles, and HR and the strategic diversity partners and these partner roles, which I love them. I've worked with some amazing HR business partners in my 10 year, is that those are people who also are providing that level of safe space. But we need to make sure every space that you go to within the organization is a safe space, particularly when you think about the HR organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I see Angela in the comments. She says, in regards to bridging the gap, as a former chief diversity officer, DEI practitioners might benefit from a coach to serve as a liaison with the C-suite executives. So, I mean, there is some strategic, like you said, some strategic partnership that could happen there. But I think it's really, really important for us to think about, where is that black hole that my information can go? Not a black hole as in it'll never be addressed again, but sometimes you do need a sounding board. Sometimes you do need some coaching and or some mentorship. And it really, really is beneficial when it comes from someone who has a shared lived experience, whether they've had that particular lived experience with you, or they can relate to you in some form or fashion. and they're not worried about litigation. So they too can speak freely. So I think that that's also a part of creating that safe space. What other ways do you think HR professionals and HR business partners can build a safe space, like you were saying before?
Well, I mean, I definitely think it's when I've seen them do it in the past is how do they build those one-on-one relationships with employees and not only with leaders within the area? How does HR also show up at events? When I think about some of the work we're doing with business resource groups, it is very intentional that many of those events we're asking our HR business partners to come to and be engaged in. From a learning perspective, how can they be more aware and culturally competent to do the roles they need to do? Because when we think about gaps, when we think about a little bit going back to our first thing about is HR for the people, is that we have so many gaps within the HR. Like I was looking for like how many, I was trying to give more demographics about HR professionals. I couldn't find some concrete demographics on there about HR professionals, but what I did find was that there is a gap between how many white managers we have and how many Black managers we have to the number of employees that we have of color, right? We have 13% of Black Americans in the world. We don't have that many HR professionals, right? And so there's already that gap in people being culturally aware and understanding of the different organizations because they don't come from that particular community, right? And so how do we make them more aware and alert and understand where their gaps are? Because that's what we haven't, like I said, once again, we haven't traditionally done. And so I think it's making sure that you as an HR, proper professional HR business partner are well informed, well educated, that you're going to your inclusion diversity team as a safe space, once again, like you said, to ask these questions that you're not aware of, or to ask them, where do I need to be better at? And then what I'm seeing is that what DEI professionals are doing, and best practices and some work that I've done, is bringing those issues that they're hearing from people in the business to all of HR. So not just your HR business partner, not just your leader that you're working with. How do you come to everyone and say, hey, there's a gap here with women in the workplace right now, or with Black people in the workplace right now? Here's what we're seeing. What are you all doing from each point of the HR business that you work in to help mitigate this? What does that look like? And so many times they're acting as, to your point, I think we can go back to where I'm seeing that liaison. They're acting at that liaison, that project manage all of these different types of these issues that are rising, and how does everyone play a role in solving for a problem for that?
Absolutely. I think I think we're both on to something. I'm sure it's happening in a lot of organizations. Yeah. But to April's point in the comments there, you got to be careful who you talk to in some organizations, which says a lot about trust, right? And the trust that has been damaged, because we have seen where folks go into spaces, share information, that information is shared with others. And unfortunately, it doesn't work out for the person that initially shared it in a beneficial way all the time. And so we would love to see more of that. I can think of one particular instance way back in the day when I worked for a tech company. Do tell, you want to know more?
You're right. I know. I was yes. Go
ahead. It was this great opportunity, I believe, to work with some women. And we were mentoring one another. I can't remember the exact scenario, but we were mentoring one another. This was before, these mentorships and these affinity groups really started happening. Ooh, now I'm aging myself. So I put up a post. I think it was on Facebook, I want to say. So I don't even think I was using LinkedIn back then. But I put up a post that said, this organization, blank organization, needs a women affinity group, or whatever I called it. Someone said I should be the person to lead that. And I felt very good about that. Actually, before I put up the post, I told my then leader about the scenario and what I said. And they were like, yeah, you should be the person to lead that. And I was like, let me put up this post. I did. And guess who came tapping on my door and on my window on Monday? HR.
Yes.
HR girl said, you need to take that post down. And I said, well, I'm happy to take it down, but it is true. This is a great opportunity for us to talk about women-centered issues at this particular tech company, for us to acknowledge one another, recognize one another. But I was still told, was brought into a whole meeting with the global HR leader and everything, told to remove it. And then after I left the organization, guess what they launched?
The Women's Business Resource
Group. Come on, somebody. They sure did. Shout out to that company. They are. I'm wearing their color today. And I'm glad that, things like that can happen. But I'm wondering, again, when we're talking about safe spaces, we're talking about ideas, how can we do and when I say we, I'll just say the arbitrary we. How can we do a better job of putting new ideas into the idea box, if you will, and making sure that they're acted upon, and HR is a part of that, DEI is a part of that?
Well, I want to go back to your story, because I think it's a great story of understanding that the world many times are moving faster than HR practices are able to catch up to, right? So I remember when I was working at a job myself, and we were doing during George Floyd, we were doing this great session on how different generations show up when it comes to fighting racial trauma, racial justice, for injustice. And someone on there said, they shared that they were just like, I think their response was like, I maybe don't understand why people are fighting, or maybe they said, I can see why people want to fight, or maybe even, fight, or maybe even tear down or burn up businesses. Maybe that was their statement.
Okay.
Well, after that statement, I did get a call from HR proper, Human Relations, that said, hey, we got a complaint that someone said that they are going to fight people on a call. And I was like, oh, wait, hold on. And so, but what they also said to me was that we've been getting lots of these calls because because what the organization was going through is having these tough conversations that people were uncomfortable with. And they said, oh, let's go to HR, Human Relations, which we have always gone to, which they're going to care for these, which HR, Human Relations was like, Employee Relations was like, these are, and then they didn't say this to me, but by their follow through with the case, I guess they came to a point where these are more personal problems versus organizational problems, right? But it goes back to how the organization and people within the organization are not moving as fast as the world is moving, and the world is changing, right? So when you think about social media, your post now, with every company would love for you to post something like that, because it's getting them energy around their inclusion diversity efforts and those type of things. So I just want to make sure we give a little bit of, I'm not saying we should give, I think we can give them grace while also holding HR accountable. And we need to do that for everyone in the organization. I think that's the other thing. I think people think that HR is going to be your saving grace for everything. And there is limits to the work that we can do within organizations. Because it was up to me, I always tell people, we need to fire probably 50% of the managers out there, because many of the managers we just hired because they knew how to do the work really well, but they didn't know how to lead. So imagine them being a leader who is 75 years old and they don't even understand the nuances of working with someone who's 20 years old, right? Like that. So how do we need to get them out of the organization, right? So that's why I would say, well, we don't have that power all the time as HR department just to fire all the leaders. It takes all the leadership getting involved in these conversations around how do we move the needle within our organization, and what do we want our organization to stand for? And then once we all decide on what the organization can stand for, how do we move in the same pace with that? So, but Blaire, I want to ask you this question. What is, as a person who's a non-HR professional, right? What do you expect from your HR department? What do you expect from your HR department? That's what I want to ask you.
Y'all all have a pen and paper out there. Let me go ahead and tell you. Well, before I go into my laundry list of things, I'll just talk about some solutions that I have experienced, because I mean, it hasn't been all bad, but those have been some scenarios that have stuck with me. But there have been some scenarios that have stuck with me. One that I could think of at an organization I worked for before, another tech company, where HR essentially stepped aside to make room for us to do what we needed to do. So I founded the first global inclusion diversity initiative at this particular organization. And it was a grassroots initiative. It just started with some interesting lunches. And that's what they used to refer to them as. The interesting lunches gave an opportunity to other people who are having lived experiences or lived experiences, just to share with me what their experience was at that particular organization. And then what we did with that information was decided to create a solution, which was an ERG. So there were ERGs and affinity groups within this global inclusion diversity initiative. So it became pretty large. It was nationwide, and it was a whole thing. It was seen on NASDAQ after, once they went public and everything. So I thought it was a great opportunity. So when we think about solutions, sometimes I wouldn't necessarily say HR needs to stand aside, but to your point, if they don't have the cultural competence or cultural sensitivity, they definitely should, do what they can to educate themselves and increase that skill set. But they also should lean on the people who are willing to do the work, instead of saying, no, we're not doing that, or no, you can't do that. No, don't talk about our company in that way. Bring that person into that conversation, into the table for solutions. Another tech company got it right as well. They created what they referred to as a warm line. Love the warm line. So it's not a black hole, but you call this number and you have an opportunity to share some of your experiences, some of your challenges, some of your issues. And typically it would be with someone who was of like ethnicity. So again, someone who was relatable in that sense. So, and then from there, you too could decide whether it needed to be escalated to employee relations and further. So I love that idea. And then I would say, with the solution. So, these town halls, I think town halls are great. Of course, everyone's not going to be bold enough to raise their hand and say all the things that need to be said in front of their leaders. But if C-level executives and senior level executives are willing to be in a room with the people, and when I say the people, I'm referring to all the people, and hear our voices. And then someone is also in there, hopefully HR and DEI, to say, this is what we've heard. Now, this is what we're going to do. And then follow up with the people. That's what I want to see. So I would definitely want to see some action, some folks that are willing to take some action, to take some risks. For those who are not knowledgeable, I saw this at a previous company as well. There were so many, they were white women, typically, who were just like, Blaire, I want to lock arm in arm with you. I don't know what I'm doing. This work is hard. Sometimes I'm crying. I've never done this before. I'm not skilled in this area, but I want to do the work. So that willingness and that passion is really important. And having the ability to understand the systemic challenges of their employees in the community. And I would say, like what you said already, like what can they do, they being HR, to make sure that DEI is woven into core values. And so that we're really cultivating safe spaces based on real stuff, because this is what we believe and this is what we do and this is how we treat people.
Well, I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said there. I think it's so important that we hold each other accountable, right? And so with that, what does that meaning, to your point, when we do have a town hall, no longer do I allow leaders to say, we're going to get employees together to talk about diversity issues if you don't have a plan. Like afterwards, I have them up front tell me, what do you think that you are going to do after this? Because there's already some things that you can start working on, because we know what we're going to hear sometimes, right? And so there's already some things that you can start mitigating and working on even before you get into that space of them. And then I think also, let's not assume that all HR professionals understand people, right? Some of them just have said, oh, we know the process, but you don't know the people. And so I think HR professionals need to be on their own inclusion and diversity learning and equity journey as everyone else in the business. So when you're doing that leadership development, don't just say we're going to take all of our leaders through it and just some of our HR leaders. Take everyone in HR along that journey of that leadership development, of that DEIBA training with you, or facilitation training with you, so they can grow as well and be more culturally aware and culturally competent. This is a new feature where we can see comments. Are you pushing them through? I'm like, what's going on here?
I know, honestly, it was an accident. I was like, oh, I like this, but this is a great comment that Day Marie, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but it says the entire company needs to be educated to understand diversity, inclusion, and equality. It should be ongoing, no one and done. Companies need to be held accountable, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. Shout out to the Migos. It starts from the top down. I love that.
And I would tell you, Day is one of the best HR professionals I've ever known in my life. I just love her. She's the top leader at her organization, and I've always been like, can I come and work for you, Day? I've known Day for almost 20 years now, since I moved to Vegas. Isn't that crazy? But she's fantastic. But so I think we got to continue this conversation. I would love for someone to come on and talk to us about what they've been studying. Day, right? I think there's someone else who commented to continue to share with us about this subject, because I think it's to your point, we're all on a journey together, and let's make sure that HR is part of that journey. And sometimes if they can drive the train, just drive the bus, as I always say. Just make sure you've got all the leaders on the bus with you, if you're going to be driving the bus as the HR DEI team as well. So that's that.
Okay, high five. I'm so proud of you. Because I know these conversations aren't always easy, but I'm sure you have a shout out today, but I'm going to shout out to DeAngelo Crane. this is the human being that has brought me into this space and has encouraged me to continue to be bold and a risk taker. This is a man who is going to be the VP of diversity and inclusion at some amazing organization at some point, and then later in life be a relationship counselor. So we're going to speak love and life into his future. Yes, amen.
I love you for that. Thank you, Fran. Thank you for leading the way. I love this. You're leading the way for so many people. I already did a shout out. I did it today. So shout out to Danae Strong, who I appreciate and love. And thank you for this great conversation today. It's very meaningful. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it, as they always do. All right. So back to you, Fran.
Well, fantastic. Well, I should have done this at the beginning because, I mean, you've definitely got us on the roll of Black-owned brands. But shout out to my friend, Justin Owens, and his brand, New Age CEOs, not a rapper, not an athlete, entrepreneur. I'm wearing this today. Yes, I'm going to have to get you one at some point.
You are an entrepreneur, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm doing the thing. We are 7 months strong at this point. Y'all keep praying for me. This thing is no B. But you know what? Today we are all about, and every day, all about that B. The B is belonging. It's diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and allyship. So make sure you join us every single week at 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode of the Black DEIBA Collective. Y'all have a great day.
Oh, Blaire, real quickly, if they want to be on the show, reach out to us. Or if they want to dress any of the hosts on the show, reach out to us. Whatever you want to do, just come on the show, okay? Dress us and come on the show. How about that? Okay.
We will see y'all soon.
All right, bye.